Well, the Cowboys jumped 6 spots on the table and won a final. They were a high-scoring, entertaining side, but how close are they to busting into that top 4? This is our season review for the North Queensland Cowboys. And to break the Cowboys down for me, zero-tackle expert analyst Darren Parkin. Hello, mate. They were ranked number 1 for errors across the season this year.
Yeah, and pretty high up in a number of offensive stats, and they probably go together. They were quite a bold, aggressive side and made a lot of errors, and that's really the thing that, as we discuss a bit later on, that they'll need to refine to turn what they are into a little bit more of a solid combination. They had a good win, albeit they weren't outstanding in their first final against Newcastle, and then got beaten by the Sharks, who had been on a bit of a run of outs in finals. So make it to the second week. But if you look at their numbers, breaking it down, so 4th for run meters, 3rd for tries, 3rd for points, massive improvement in missed tackles, which we'll touch on in a moment, massive improvement in line breaks, ranked 3rd offensively. There are only 2 sides that scored more than them over the course of the season, but they did have the worst defensive record of every side that made the finals, and that was by quite a margin, 47 points worse defensively than the team that was ranked 7th defensively, and they conceded 130 more points than the sides either side of them, 4th and 6th on the table. So that's really the issue for them. Their scoring went through the roof, but they just couldn't limit sides enough. And as we've seen by the benchmark team in the competition in Penrith and really across every sport, AFL, basketball, soccer, the sides that defend best win titles, not just the sides that score the most. So, yeah, they've certainly got to find a way to tighten it up.
Yep, absolutely. Let's dive a bit deeper into their pass mark. All right, so coming off of 2023, that was a pretty frustrating year for Cowboys fans, but they did show that they had the talent to play finals.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the consensus from most people was that they were good enough. If you look at last year, they lost to the likes of the Broncos, Eels, Warriors and Titans, to this season. And at key stages that they played in patches in both of their finals as well, which kind of summed them up, where they could produce some really, really good performances, some poor performances, sometimes within the same game. So, look, last year they underachieved. They added quite a bit of polish with the ball this year and were always dangerous. They just couldn't quite nail that consistency. But looking at where they did improve, so control of the ball. So they ranked 2nd for time in possession over the course of the season. They were ranked 9th last year in that same stat. Last year they were averaging 39.6 missed tackles a game, which was the 2nd most in the competition. They're now ranked 14th at just 28, so that's a vast improvement. So discipline and control of the ball, good. They just had to know when to pull the trigger. They made a few mistakes and that ultimately cost them. But I think it's a pass mark for sure. If you finish top 6 and you win a final coming from outside of the 8, I think that's a step in the right direction for them.
Yeah, a definite pass for the Cowboys in 2024. Let's go into now the lowlights. All right, so lowlights, as you mentioned before, their defensive frailties and their inconsistency, biggest challenges this year.
Yeah, capable of just about anything, just whether they could do it long enough. So we mentioned their improvement in missed tackles. That was a huge jump for them. But then you take the semi-final loss to the Sharks. They threw up 50 missed tackles in that game, which is enormous, the most conceded by a team in a final in a very long time. So, and then you look at some of their inconsistency within games. They played the Broncos in round 23. Now, the Broncos season was shot at that point, and the Cowboys led 18-6 and then coughed it up and got beaten right when they were a chance to push for top 4. So that definitely hurt them. And I guess another low light is something that would potentially prove to be a challenge, and Kyle Feldt and Val Holmes leaving the club. Kyle Feldt off to St Helens to play overseas, and Val Holmes joining the Dragons. Now, they produced 346 of the team's 657 points, so more than half, and obviously more than the rest of the squad put together. So that's going to pose some challenges in terms of replacing them over summer.
Yep, some frustrating moments there, but let's take a turn and go to the highlights. So the highlights for the Cowboys. Now, we'll talk about the Panthers win in a second, but we'll start with where their improvement came from, which was their attacking game.
Yeah, averaging 26 points a game. As we said at the start, top 4 for tries, for metres gained, for total points. So they were an offensive weapon, and that was demonstrated. I mean, if you judge a team by what their best form looks like, so they beat the Panthers in round 17, and that showed that they could stack up against the top sides in the competition, and then they came from behind a few weeks earlier against the Roosters and when they had a lot of players unavailable due to state of origin at that point. So that's 2 wins over top 4 sides, and one of them under duress. So they get a lot of credit for that. And they also made the decision at the start of the year around co-captains, which always attracts some debate as to whether it's better to go with one leader. But that worked really well. Tom Deard and Ruben Cotter, they led by example. They worked well together. Their discipline. So that proved to be quite a cohesive appointment.
Yep, absolutely. Now let's move on to a standout player. All right, so the standout player for the Cowboys this year, their fullback, Scott Drinkwater.
Yeah, career high in a number of areas. 26 try assists, which was second in the competition to the Dragons' Ben Hunt, who's no longer the Dragons' Ben Hunt. But he also had the most line break assists in the league, scored 10 tries, 161 running metres per game. Every one of those stats, as we mentioned, was a career best for him. So undeniably their best player this season.
Yep, absolutely. Now let's move over to the headlines. So the headlines for the Cowboys, actually not a very controversial year for them. As you said, they stay pretty quiet up there in the far north, but they did have a bit of a poaching raid by the Dragons.
Yeah, I mean, it's not a huge story. It might not even be a huge deal, but it's always interesting. One of the challenges that those sides face that are in, I guess, the isolated teams. So you look at the Warriors in New Zealand, the Melbourne Storm, the North Queensland Cowboys that are kind of out on their own a little bit. They're not in Sydney or Brisbane. Is you need to acquire local talent. There's always a risk that you're going to have players pulled away who are from other states anyway, wanting to go home. But the Dragons were able to sneak up to Townsville and sign 14 juniors over the last few weeks, all between sort of 14 and 17 years of age. Now, that might not amount to much, but that's really a backyard that the Cowboys want to completely own. You want to make sure that if there is some local homegrown talent, that you take it completely. So they'd be a little bit frustrated by that. So on a relatively quiet year on the headline front, they'll probably want to tighten that loophole.
Yep, absolutely. Okay, looking ahead to 2025 and the pass mark now. So I think it's a pretty clear one. They just need to take that next step into top 4.
Yeah, and the other side of what we're talking about with them being isolated up north is that you can protect that home record quite well. So, I mean, they're a side that would anticipate winning the majority of their home games. And if you pick up a few on the road, you leave yourself pretty happy. But the order of the day for them is just to bridge that gap between their best and worst football, sometimes within matches. They beat top 4 sides and then lose to bottom 4 sides the next week. And the 568 points they conceded was nearly 200 more than the side that won the premiership in Penrith. So, and look, Penrith are clearly the standout and have been for a long time there, but it does show what's required. I mean, they've got a lot of exciting attacking options, Tulagi, Drinkwater, Nanai, and these sorts of players, but they just can't leak scores as heavily as they did. So if they can plug those gaps, they could push into the top 4, but I would think at the very least that a finals appearance would be their base level.
Yep. All right, well, that wraps it up for our 2024 season review for the Cowboys. Thank you, Darren. Should be a pretty exciting year for them next year.
Yeah, they're a fun side to watch, and you probably want them to be a little bit more dour for their own chances, which would make them slightly less fun to watch, but probably a better side.
Yep, absolutely. So thank you for watching. Let us know in the comments if you think the Cowboys can take that next step to a premiership. Remember to like and subscribe, as we'll be doing reviews for every team in the NRL, and we'll also be looking ahead to 2026 and who your team should be targeting. A lot of those videos are actually up on the channel now. Like, subscribe, and check out all the latest NRL news at zerotackle.com.